My name's Guy Kesterman, and for nearly 25 years I've been a professional mountain bike and kit tester. And the bike I am wheeling out of the box today is the new Zesty TR5.9 from Lapierre. And this is their 120mm 29er all alloy frame with some great genetics and some very famous riders in the development program. So I'm going to get it into my park work stand and we'll have a quick look through the details on this bike before I go hit the trails. So if you've watched this channel before, you know I am a big fan of aggressive angled trail 29ers, and I like an affordable bike that potentially offers a lot of performance for the price. So this looks, this little French bike looks right up my roo. 120mm front, courtesy of this Fox Rhythm 34 fork. Again, I really like this fork. It's one of the first forks to come through with the grip damper, nice and simple. It's actually got a heavier chassis than the more expensive 34s, but that makes it stiffer. It's a different alloy in the stanchion tube, so it's a stiffer, better steering fork, especially in this shorter 120mm format. Interesting to see they've gone for lockout there. So, you know, I mean, this bike at this price point weighs 15.3 kilos, so it wouldn't be my first choice for a climbing bike anyway. And, you know, you've got this lockout on the top there, and it's only the fork that locks out remotely. There's no corresponding lockout on the rear shock. I mean, it has got a lockout, a manual lockout, but it's not a remote lockout. So, you know, there's some interesting choices going on here. And while we're on the subject, also, you've got GX drivetrain throughout, but also carbon fibre crank. So, you know, I mean, to be fair, in terms of saving weight, cranks are an easy way to save a lot of weight relatively cost effectively, but they kind of save weight in the place where it matters least, right down in the centre of the bike and, you know, low in the centre of gravity. So, you know, again, but, you know, different companies go about saving weight or adding weight or speccing the bikes in different ways. And, you know, certainly, you know, four-caster rear tyre with an Ardent front is an interesting choice. I'll be keen to see how that goes, but it's a 2.4 on the front. It's exo carcass, it's dual compound, and then on the back you got this 235 four-caster. So normally I would have said Ardent on the rear, four-caster on the back, but, you know, when you've got Nico Vulio, multiple world downhill champion and renowned bike fettler, working as one of your kind of product assessment riders, I should probably shut up. You know, that guy has a pretty impressive track record. So let's just talk through the fundamentals of the frame. You've got a 66-degree head angle, 75.5 degree effective seat angle. It's a 475mm reach on this large, so relatively rangy bike, 35mm bottom bracket drop below the axles, and super short rear end, 428mm, even with reasonable tyre clearance on this 29 by 2.35 tyre. And that's because you've got this unique sort of tucked in architecture here. You've got the main pivot just behind here, and then this whole section in the bottom of the seat tube is this kind of extruded, kind of curved piece there that runs all the way down to the bottom bracket. And then you've got this little rocker, you know, chunky rocker linkage there, single piece, and that just drives it down. So the shock is actually forced backwards down onto the swing arm again. So there's a lot going on. I mean, effectively, it's a fully floating shock. You've got a little mud guard there to protect the stanchions from any damage. And then moving on to the back, you've got a horse link pivot on the chainstay. So you've got a fully 4-bar suspension kinematic with a floating shock. So although the layout is very different, it's kind of similar to setups from Trek and Pace in the fact, you know, that none of it kind of bottoms out into the main frame, apart from the linkage pivots and the main pivot there. So, back end, again, this used to be quite a characteristic of Zesty's. I had a Zesty TR I absolutely loved, God, far too long ago to remember, probably nearly 10 years. But that was kind of flipped the logic around on stay size. That had really big seat stays and relatively small chain stays. These are kind of more balanced, but still it's a big old chunky seat stay there. And then you've got this chain stay, you know, multifaceted, hydroformed, and then it's actually a plate at the front there just to give the clearance on the chainring and the tyre. and still keep it super tight and tucked in. And you've got this rubber protector on there, internal routing all the way through, and then you've got internal routing there for this seat post. Relatively short stroke seat posts. I think it goes 80 on a small, then 120 on medium, up to 130mm on large and extra large. So, you know, you're not getting a massive 170mm stroke on there. And obviously there's a slight limit onto how much seat post drop you can get in there. And I have to say that's probably the ugliest seat clamp I've seen in a very long time. But you have got a big bolt and a big receiver, so even if you go full ogre tightening that up, apart from the chance you might damage the seat post, so don't do that, you know, it does look pretty damn robust. Moving up to the front, you've got 45mm Lapierre stem, so that's a reasonable length. You know, looks a solid enough piece. You've got 760mm bars, so again, relatively narrow for a bike, you know, which has got quite aggressive angles and quite an aggressive length. And then you've got ribbed grips there, but, you know, metal edge on the outer edge, which I know not everyone's crazy about. And you've got guide T brakes, so it's the basic guide brake, but you do get 200mm front rotor, and somewhere over there is a 180mm rear rotor. Just noticed it's actually an NX shifter pod there, so although the rear mech is GX, that's an NX shifter pod, and it looks like either an NX or SX cassette. So there's a fair amount of weight creeping in there compared to having the lighter pinned architecture and 1050 spread of GX. This would be a 1150 spread, and it's either SX or NX there. In terms of sort of mechanics and details, you've got space for bottle cage there, and nothing underneath in terms of bottle cage, but you have got a little bit of tape there to protect the frame. Yeah, like I say, it's a fully alloy frame. They do several Zesties in the TR range, all relatively affordable, and then they do 4 different Zesty AMs as well, which are 150mm travel in 27.5 wheel size, or they do 29er versions as well, which get 140mm travel. And then, of course, there's the E-Zesty range of e-bikes using the Fazua motor, one of which I've already tested for the channel, so I'll stick a link up probably up there. If that's anything as a signpost on the way this is going to ride, it's going to be really, really well sorted in terms of geometry, but maybe tuned a little soft, so I might be needing to use that 3-position lever on this float DPS shock in there. But, you know, that's conjecture. What I need to do is get my Crank Brothers pedals on there, get the bar and stem set up, get the suspension somewhere in a ballpark. I know I'm going to like that Fox 34 fork. I presume I'm going to like the Zesty back end, because I definitely liked it on the e-bike, and the geometry sounds pretty sound. So I reckon this is going to be a pretty positive ride experience. We'll just have to see how some of those tyre and remote lockout kind of idiosyncrasies work out on the trail, and whether, you know, having big old pivots back there and, you know, chunky stays makes up for the kind of cutaways and relatively narrow stance in this area. So, I reckon there's going to be a lot to talk about on this. It's a cracking day outside. Let's get on with it. So that's the quick walk around close-up done on it. Like I say, time to get my Crank Brothers pedals on it and head out and hit the trails and see how this trunnion-driven shock down in the belly of the beast, you know, that really low centre of gravity they're obviously aiming for, and the short rear end, combined with a pretty rangy front end and 120mm travel, see how they cope. I think I'm going to take it to Stainburn. Looks hardcore enough, so let's hit the trails full on. Anyway, hope you've enjoyed watching this unboxing. Obviously, I'll be testing the bike going forwards over time. There'll probably be some test videos appearing on my Patreon subscription channel, which is there'll probably be some testing videos appearing on my Patreon channel, which is paid for by these excellent folk and others who support me with a small monthly donation, which makes it possible for me to make unsponsored edits like this and do some behind the scenes, extended cuts, that kind of thing. You know, some really interesting. I generally try and put all the sort of detailed background tinkering info on there just to give people a bit of extra content and a bit of kind of extra story on the bike test kind of journey. And anyway, I've been Guy Kestevan, this has been Guy Kes TV, and I've been talking about Lapierre's Zesty TR5.9, affordable aggro short travel 29er.